Max Seddon did some decent reporting. He is a writer for the Financial Times, and he interviewed a Vladimir Putin-aligned oligarch. And he asked him some questions about potential peace proposals, and this guy is very close to the regime in Moscow. So close, in fact, that he was sanctioned all the way back in 2014. So he wasn't with the more recent wave of sanctions in 2022, where they really threw out the net and tried to catch as many as they could. Or at least, you know, that's what they said, and they kind of did a little bit. Don't want to get into it. But they threw out the net and they caught a bunch of people. This was back in the day when they were being a lot more selective in their response to the Russian invasion and annexation of Crimea. And it was back then that he was sanctioned. Now, he is an influential tycoon. And some people are reading this article, and I think I agree to it to some degree, are reading this article as a reading of the pro-war establishment who are aligned with Putin, people around Putin, of influence, of power, the people who are the power brokers who support the regime. So whether or not these are people who would want a quick victory, or a slow, or a, you know, not a quick victory, but a quick deal, or be able to quickly reject a deal for better terms, like these are the people that Putin might be looking to see, will they support me through this? Because if I can get their support, maybe I can win the people's down the line, or et cetera, et cetera. And so I wouldn't, now while I agree with that somewhat, I also would say that this is a Financial Times article. This article was written for the public. He knew it when it was being written for the public. And him being so closely aligned with Putin, him going out there and banging his chest a bunch, you know, it's a possibility, since we're going to read his terms, that this is an attempt to be like, oh, you don't want to deal with those types. You want to deal with me, friendly Mr. Putin, who just wants to give us the city of Kherson, Zaporizhia, no NATO, maybe a little bit of demilitarization while you're at it. Let's read what this, what Konstantin has to say. Konstantin, a Russian tycoon who was subject to Western sanctions, told the Financial Times that President Vladimir Putin was likely to reject a peace plan proposed by Trump's recently nominated special envoy for the conflict, Keith Kellogg. Now, for those of you who don't know Keith Kellogg is well, out of all the people that Trump could have picked to be the envoy, he is certainly not the worst. I would even say, out of all the options, he's maybe on the, I wouldn't even go as far as to say, on the more positive side of the choice spectrum. And the reason of this is simple. Keith Kellogg has always supported Ukraine. Keith Kellogg's, even his recent statements of, well, you know, my job is to find peace, and, you know, him being surrounded by these people talking about forever wars, his most recent speeches and public statements around the war have not been, hey guys, I think that it would be cool if we just, you know, had peace or whatever. It has been, what we're going to do is we're going to offer a deal. And then if they don't like the deal, we're going to massively increase aid. And while Trump said this on the campaign trail, the fact that Keith Kellogg is saying it, someone who's seen as at least respectable in the foreign policy establishment, does add more credibility to the claim. And if that is the case, I will say backing out of a peace deal might come with some unnecessary consequences for the Kremlin if they thought, all we have to do is walk away from the table and they'll come crawling back. Trump promised it on the campaign trail before. It wouldn't be the first time Trump has gone back on a promise and, hey, this is his second term. He can't get elected again. Let's check out a quick thing from Keith Kellogg so you can get the temperament of this man. Mind you, this is like a year or something old, so this is some old temperament, but the fundamental philosophy I do still believe exists in this man to a certain degree.
Bottom line, the Ukrainians want to fight. They don't want U.S. troops. They don't want NATO troops. All they want is equipment, and they're going to fight this to the end. It's very clear to them that this is a very aggressive Russia move. It's targeted on civilians. It's targeted on infrastructure. You know, we went out pretty far to the northeast, and we saw some absolute incredible destruction out there by the Russians. And it was targeted on infrastructure. It was targeted on hospitals. It was targeted on schools. In fact, the mayor of Kyiv told us later that this is genocide. And I think when we look at what's going to happen over there, I believe it's very important we get them the equipment to fight, because I think now we're right on the cusp. And I think it's going to come out probably in just a couple of months, when we get into the spring, into the summer, and then into the fall, this is going to be a fight to the end. The Ukrainians are not going to negotiate. They have no intention to negotiate. They want to eject Russian forces from Ukraine. I don't care if it's a Donbass. I don't care if it's Crimea. And they're committed to it. And I talk to a lot of government officials, military officials, civilians that are out there. It's a very committed nation. If anybody doubts their loyalty to Ukraine, they're badly mistaken. And again, as I said, I think it's a fight to the finish.
Well, you've been right along the way here. In general, the only thing is, if they're adamant about not giving up an inch of land or letting the Russians have an inch of land, Vladimir Putin is equally adamant about unleashing holy hell on civilians. He's not going anywhere. What's the end game here?
Yeah, here's what I think the end game is, Neil. I think evicting the Russians from Ukraine, I think they've got the capacity to do it, the Ukrainians, with their fighting spirit, as long as we give them the kit. Because I think they've got the Russians at least at a stalemate and possibly on their heels. And I think why this is important, geostrategically, if the Ukrainians can defeat Russia in the field and eject them from the Donbass or Crimea, Putin falls. And it changes Europe for a generation to come. People need to realize Ukraine is the second largest country in Europe. I mean, I saw that just driving it. And
yeah,
they're very.
I remember Patrick Hillsman used to say that it was like setting sail from going one city to another. And I get what he meant by it. It is quite a distance. It's like it's like an 8, 9, 10 hour drive a lot of times. Then you add the checkpoints. My God.
Very committed to freedom and democracy. They recognize they've got some issues with things that have happened in the past, with illegal activities going on. They understand that. They're trying to correct it. But boy, I'll tell you, their military is a fighting military.
I just found, so you can see the general foundations for an idea. He seems to believe that the Ukrainians could win if they had the right kit. Therefore, in his mind, here's your peace deal. You don't want it? Fine. We're going to double, we're going to triple, we're going to quadruple aid. To him, that's consistent logic. To him, that would be consistent to what he has been saying up to this point. And this will continue to send them more aid does seem to be the philosophy he's still standing with. Obviously, the strategic situation has changed a little bit, but I still think the same philosophy applies. Even if it isn't you push them out of Crimea with force this way, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It could definitely be you will have to negotiate on terms that are acceptable to the Ukrainians, or you will continue to bleed. Either way, if he believes the one or the other, either could be the end result, more aid to Ukraine if they don't accept the deal. So it is interesting. It is interesting. By the way, I think they actually released a more recent Keith Kellogg interview. One second. Is this it? I think this might be it. Yes, this is from his... I want to see what they have to say recently, and then we'll continue with the peace deal article. I just want to hear if he said anything of interest.
Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg is the incoming nominee as special envoy to Russia and Ukraine. He's also former national security advisor to President Trump and VP Mike Pence. Welcome to you, General, and thank you so much for being here. First up, what do you think of this proposal to end the war for NATO membership? Are you in on that?
Well, Sandra, to start with, thanks for having me. Look, I wouldn't make any pronouncements at all, because that's going to be up to President-elect Trump when he comes into office, what he intends to do, what he doesn't intend to do. And I never foreclose anything. President Trump has always said that. You never put your options on the table.
See what the difference is here? The difference is now he's on the president's leash. I don't believe the philosophy's changed, fundamentally, but I do believe now he understands what type of man he's working for and who he has to please. And that, at the end of the day, is going to be the biggest barrier for even somebody who is sympathetic to the Ukrainian struggle and wants them to win, or thinks they can win, or wants to give them material to win or get them the best deal possible. That's going to be the biggest barrier. Because at the end of the day, he's the commander-in-chief. And if he ends up saying, yeah, give him here, son, who cares? What's that city matter? Then, I mean, it is what it is.
You let it go forward. I think what's happened is the president is very clear, though, by naming a special envoy, that he was very serious about his campaign promises.
And I am also, he is a former general. And when you look at his proposed defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, he was a rank and file soldier. He was not a general. These types of strategic, he has much more military strategic background than everybody else. Tulsi Gabbard? No. If Matt Gaetz was going to get it, that's a no. So, I mean, he would be the one, out of everybody whispering in the room, he would make sense to be the one to listen to probably the most, at least out of everybody when it comes to experience base. but I don't know if Trump's going to vibe that way, or if he's going to be like, I'm going to go to lunch with Vivek and see what he thinks.
To end the war.
Because, I mean, like, Trump has had a, let's say, frosty relationship with generals.
And he said, stop the killing. And that's what he really wants to do. And we've shown that in the past. I wish that President Biden had done that, put an envoy in place to try to end the war, because it's so massive what's happening right now. You know, I do have to step back a bit and look at the nominees, because there is a little bit, you have to smile a bit.
Listen to the difference of how he talks about it now, though, that he's working for Trump. Look at before. The Ukrainians are not going to negotiate. Why do they negotiate? And now it's like, why didn't Biden appoint a special envoy? That's just steep. And it's not like it's like a year difference between these interviews.
You kind of have to think back. It goes all the way back to 1521 when the conquistador Cortez invaded Mexico from Cuba and he burned the boats. And that's what we're doing right now is we're burning the boats. We're going forward. We're going to change the government. He's going to focus on the economy. He, the president-elect, he's going to focus on the border, which is critical. But he's also going to realize he's got international obligations and things that he has to do as well. And Ukraine's one of them. So I wouldn't say what he's going to do, because that's up to the president to make that decision. We're just going to try to execute it. I'm just a mere, like a spokesman and somebody to work what he wants to do. So it's going to be hard to say what he wants, but we'll figure it out as we go forward.
Obviously, a very respected advisor to the president-elect as well.
I mean, I wouldn't be that surprised if they still don't know what he wants, honestly. Concept of a plan.
General, I want to play out the sound from Zelensky on ending the hot stage of this war in Ukraine. This was an interview in Kyiv.
Okay, we already did a segment on this. You can go check that out on my main channel. I don't really hear Keith Kellogg's point, because it's just going to be the same thing. It's just going to be like, well, you know, I can't really say this, can't really say that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, wait, no, it's not on Zelensky. It's on Jake Sullivan, actually. Maybe I will want to hear it.
We are going to do everything in our power for these 50 days to get Ukraine all the tools we possibly can to strengthen their position on the battlefield so that they'll be stronger at the negotiating table. And President Biden directed me to oversee a massive surge in the military equipment that we are delivering to Ukraine, so that we have spent every dollar that Congress has appropriated to us by the time that President Biden leaves office.
I'm going to get your thoughts on that from the outgoing administration, General.
There's a good chance they won't be able to, by the way. They took too long.
Yeah.
Some will be probably left over.
You know, in a way, it's really pretty good for the president-elect, because it gives him leverage. He can make the decision on what he wants to do, and the more that the Biden administration does this, it creates a greater opportunity for the president-elect.
See, that's the logic. Because if you look at the base, or a lot of the people around, Keith Kellogg probably saw the long-range strike decision. He said, good. I think there's even a chance Trump said good, because he might be able to understand at least the concept of leverage. Art of the deal guy, even if he didn't do much deal-making in Congress. But I mean, if you look at the other people, like his admin, like Tulsi Gabbard, like these are things that they would scoff at. They'd call like World War III baiting. And so it seems that he, at least the special envoy, not that he has any direct control over these things, seems to understand the concept of leverage.
To do.
But now the important part is getting that through to the president.
What he wants to do. And again, he understands leverage probably better than anybody based on his business experience. But, you know, go back to September when Zelensky came to Trump Tower and he went up there and then he and the president spoke, and they were talking about after 1,000 days of war, they're signaling it's time for this war to end. Because the president said very clearly, and it's a quote, it is time. And he's right about that. This war's gone on for over 1,000 days. It's expanded. It's now global in nature. When I mean global in nature, when you look at what's happened, you've got the North Koreans involved by providing troops. You've got the Iranians involved. You've got the Chinese involved. And you've got the Russians involved. So the makeup of the war has expanded. And it's time we kind of put it back in a box, not only for American security, but for global security as well. Yeah. So I don't have a problem with what they've done. It's all based on leverage. The president understands that, and he's going to use it to his advantage.
General, if I could just get you to respond, I've only got about 10 seconds left, to this Russian tycoon quoted in the Financial Times talking about whether Putin will engage with the U.S. on certain conflicts. Apparently, that's only on broader conflicts. This tycoon says Kellogg comes to Moscow with his plan. We take it and then tell him to screw himself because we don't like any of it. That'd be the whole negotiation. For the talks to be constructive, we need to talk not about the future of Ukraine, but the future of Europe and the world. Real quick, final thought, or final reaction, I should say.
Yeah, my reaction to that, he better understand who Donald J. Trump is, because it's a big mistake to underestimate Donald J. Trump. The world has done that before and has made a massive mistake. This is not Keith Kellogg. We're talking about the United States of America and President Trump, and he will handle it like he's always handled it. And I would just, my comment to him is, better get back in your box and better understand President Trump, because clearly you don't, and you clearly do not understand the United States of America.
That didn't really inspire much confidence. It's mostly just Trump simping. Anyway, but that is what he said. Kellogg comes to Moscow with his plan. We take it and then tell him to screw himself because we don't like any of it. That'd be the whole negotiation. For the talks to be constructive, we need to talk about not the future of Ukraine, but the future of Europe and the world. Putin wants a general rebalancing. Putin would like a general rebalancing of the world order. Putin would like it if NATO rolled back in Europe. They would like it if maybe even the European rolled back some. and they acknowledge their quote-unquote spheres of influence and their legitimate security concerns, and that is they're the largest country on the planet and everything they touch is theirs, right? They span multiple continents, but everything they touch is theirs. Just like the reindeer herders out east were theirs, just like the Tuvans were theirs, just like the Karelians were theirs, just like all these people, they were all theirs. All theirs. And now the same thing has come for Ukraine. Now the Ukrainians are theirs. So, look, I don't know if this is just this guy beating his chest. In fact, I'd probably, if forced to, would bet on it. But I do think it does show an underlying belief that Putin does have, or that his ruling regime has, generally speaking, even if they don't think they can achieve it all right now. He said that Trump could only end the conflict if he reversed Washington's decisions on the use of advanced long-range weapons and removed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky from office, then agreed to meet Putin and discuss all the issues of the global order at the highest level. This is just a wish list. This is just a fantasy wish list. This will never happen. This will never happen. This will never happen. This will never happen. Number one, if Trump was to end long-range strikes, he'd be going to negotiations, and before going to negotiations saying, I do not want leverage. I do not want... Somebody who believes in madman theory doesn't like the idea of being able to give missiles to the Ukrainians that can strike into Russia. Like, if he pulls back from it, it's the opposite of peace through strength diplomacy that he's promoted. That it would be the opposite of it. Doesn't mean that he won't pursue it anyway. If he has different advisors like Tulsi Gabbard whispering in his ear, but it is the opposite of the stated philosophy. I've always said that Trump wasn't consistent in his foreign policy philosophies. This could just be one example among many, but it's a particularly frustrating example with a lot of lives on the line. As for removing Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, good luck. Does anybody look at what the Russians have been through for the last 3 years and say, golly gee, can we try that but from the West now? Let's invade from Poland and you think these guys won't fight a guerrilla? What do you mean remove him? They're not, the Americans aren't going to invade. And that'd be the only way you would be able to physically remove him, because you're not going to say Zelensky steps down or no. It's just, you're going to destroy America's reputation amongst the Ukrainian population. Zelensky is almost certainly not going to step down. And if you make him step down, I think the person who replaces him will probably just be more bullish than him. Maybe not as diplomatically skilled, but if Budanov becomes president of the United States president of the United States, my God, that's the long game. President of Ukraine after Zelensky gets assassinated or something, or removed, I don't think it's going to be a conciliatory conversation. Well, if it's Zelensky, I mean, you're putting somebody in there that's like a Ukrainian war hero. That's probably not something they're going to prefer either. But that's, out of all the figures in the Ukrainian public life, Zelensky is the most popular. The former commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, who's now the ambassador to the United Kingdom after he was replaced with Syrskyi, the Soviet-style commander.
Assuming Tulsi Gabbard becomes director of national intelligence, and with her sucking up to Putin, her title, DNI, may as well read, do not interact.
Look, I'm not one to speculate openly, but I just gotta say, if anyone ever deserved an FBI background check but isn't getting one, it is Tulsi. Let's keep going. He warned that the world is on the brink of nuclear war. Whoa, this is the first time I'm hearing about this. Haven't heard this in the last 3 years. After Kiev fired U.S. and UK-made long-range missiles into Russian territory, and Putin responded by firing an experimental nuclear-capable ballistic missile at Ukraine. Just days before his nomination, Kellogg told Fox News that Washington should call Russia's bluff in response to Putin's recent ballistic missile strike on the Ukrainian city of Dnipro and threats of further escalation. Putin used the nuclear-capable missile for psychological reasons, Kellogg said. He didn't use it because it was militarily effective. It wasn't. It's true, it wasn't. And plus, they don't have, like, traditional payloads for those types of weapons. So I think they were probably inert because the but the multiple reentry vehicles, the multiple, warheads that come down, they're made for, atomic devices. They didn't have a traditional device to put in there, so it just was... it injured 2 people. It was still bad, but it was not the hellstorm that you would imagine with such, pompous circumstance and, you know, celebration from the Russians. Rather than back off, he added, the U.S. and Western allies should lean in because Putin will not start a nuclear war with Europe. Konstantin, however, argued that if the U.S. did not agree to roll back its support for Ukraine, Russia could fire a tactical nuclear weapon, and there will be a radiation zone nobody will ever go into in our lifetime, he said, and the war will be over. Well, I mean, you'd have to fire a lot of tactical nuclear weapons. If you fire one or two, that won't really substantially change anything. And I'm not being I mean, like a tactical nuclear weapon, we're talking about something fired out of like an artillery gun. We're talking about something fired out like a Davy Crockett. Those old Davy Crockett's we used to have during the Cold War. Things are scary, but like that alone is not going to change the balance of a war. You might be able to completely demolish a village and make it so nobody will ever come back there, but like you're going to have to use tons and tons and tons of them all across the front line in order to cause a general breakthrough, and the environmental damage of that would be, yes, immense over the country you're trying to conquer and take over. The damage it would make between the Russians and the domestic population, well, I don't think the relationship can get much better. I mean, get much worse. This is one way you might be able to find the ability to be able to inspire like Ukrainian jihadism against Russia for a generation. But either way, both the Chinese and the Indians have reasons for this non-nuclear norm to stay in place. The Indians don't want the Pakistanis getting any crazy ideas about places like Kashmir and the use of atomic weapons to saber rattle or go into offensive actions to take territorial clay. And the Chinese don't want the North Koreans getting any crazy ideas, upsetting their relationship with South Korea, the Asia Pacific, or just generally destabilizing the region. They'd rather keep them as a short leash as bargaining power against the West, which is being complicated, by the way, by the Russians doing technology sharing and making this new arrangement with them. It's actually not really made the Chinese very happy, that's for sure. He said Moscow would only see it as a lasting condition for peace if Trump is willing to discuss other global flashpoints, including the Middle East and Russia's burgeoning alliance with China, and a U.S. acknowledgement that Ukraine is part of the Kremlin's core interests. Again, it's our state. We own it. It's ours. It doesn't matter what the Ukrainians think. It doesn't matter what their people say. They're ours. We own them. They belong to us. Do they realize how deeply evil they sound? I'm not trying to be like facetious here. It's one thing to say, they're our strategic partner and da-da-da-da-da, and well, they're in our region, so their security is our security, and you know, if they get destable, we're going to have to go and do something to protect them. No, they're part of our core interests. They're part of our core interests. Their future's our future. They're an extension of the Russian Federation. That is what Putin said in his essays. That's what Putin said in his speech. I think you guys should listen to Putin a little bit. Also, like this idea that a peace in Ukraine has to be based upon Russia's burgeoning relationship with China or the Middle East. Bullshit. Bullshit. Bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. That's how you sink it. That's how you sink negotiations. Once you start saying, okay, let's negotiate Ukraine. Okay, we can only negotiate Ukraine once we negotiate Israel-Palestine. Well, I mean, but these are very different wars, very different conditions, and like getting the Israelis to play ball and the Ukrainians to play ball is very different when you talk about like aid percentages and like Israel has nukes, Ukraine doesn't because we told them to give them up. But like, you know what? Like, you know, it's very different. Oh, also, we need to talk about Taiwan. Oh, also, our relationship with China. Oh, also, we need to talk about the dominance of the U.S. dollar. When does it end? Negotiate terms on the war. Keep it short, keep it simple, and leave as few sticking points as possible to get caught up to make the thing fail, if you want it to succeed. We want a long-term peace, some sort of general agreement about the global order. Trump wants to go down in history. He'll be 80 soon. He's a grandfather. Putin's not 50 anymore either. It'll be the legacy they both leave us. That is true. That's the only part of what he said that I agree with. But God, I mean, like what? Saying like, oh, we can only have peace in Ukraine if we also negotiate the fact that Russia and China are going to do this and the Middle East is going to do that. Do you want the negotiations to succeed or not? Because saying it like that sounds like you don't want the negotiations to succeed. I can go back to my apartment and take a nap while my editor edits the stuff.